Good evening to everyone. And I'm Akbar Bulumul, as my good friend Pial introduced me. And my background is, I'll first explain my background. I'm a mechanical engineer, graduated from University of Wales, London, Cardiff. And then also I did my master's in information for manufacturing systems. So I'll just brief through my
Akbar,
employment history. That is 1984.
One minute, Akbar. Can you put it into the presentation mode? You go down there and make it presentation.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one there. I think wrong button you pressed. Not that one, not that one. One more. Another one. Yeah. Not that one. Go to the right.
Extreme right.
Yes, sir, that's the one.
That one. Press it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. 1984 to 86. Well, I got my degree in mechanical engineering in 1984, and came back to Sri Lanka and joined Brown and Company as a trainee engineer. And I was given training for about a year, and then became a mechanical engineer and worked there for another 1 year. And then I wanted to do higher studies. Therefore, I said bye to that job and joined the University of Peradeniya Faculty of Engineering in the academic as well as research section. So from 86 to 87, I was at Faculty of Engineering. And then you remember that there was a civil war at that time. And in fact, I was planning to go to USA for PhD, but the coming color was not good at that time. And at the same time, I was offered a master's degree in the same university I did my first degree. So then 87 September, I went back to Cardiff and did my master's in IT for manufacturing systems. Then 87 to 88, I was there. Then 88, 89 rather. 89, I started working at Kogi Toys, where I did my project. So they offered me a job over there. Then I worked as a systems engineer, where I had to, it's accepting the orders and the new designs, and it's a toy manufacturing company. And it's mainly their business was in the US. So they were manufacturing and exporting to US. And my task was like to, the coordination part, and they wanted new designs and etc. etc. And that's what I did in there. And then I was there till 92. And in the meantime, I got married and in UK, then came back to Sri Lanka in 92, late 92, and applied to DFCC. And then they offered me a job over there as a project manager, project officer. Sorry. So DFCC, I was there from January 93 to mid 98. I was working as a project officer and senior project officer in both the capacities. 98, I got an opportunity to take over the NDB Kandy branch. Then I decided to do that. And initially they took me as the deputy manager, and because they wanted me to take over the branch after some time. Then I didn't have the experience, working experience of a branch manager, so they decided to take me as the deputy manager and later to take over the branch. So but of course, my intentions were different. I wanted to go on my own, and then having working there for 2.5 years, I decided to resign, and then the whole family went back to England. That is 2001, and then I worked for a company, not really a company, an affiliated institution for UN. What they were doing was that they were doing some project reports to get some finance for power projects in Eastern African region. So my supervisor was he was a professor at that time, and he was one of that particular institution was his, and he asked me to join them and do some project reports. So I joined them, and I worked for him about a year. But in the meantime, my intention was to go on my own, and therefore I after working there 1 year, I came back to Sri Lanka with some investors, and then from 2002, early 2002, I came back, and then 2002 to 2004, I started my 2002, of course, started my the first power project called Pan Asian Power. Actually, I met Pial for the second time because Pial is the one who helped me to get the loan for the project. So it's HNB and NTB jointly financed 80 million. That was a pretty big amount at that time, 80 million for the project. So from 2002, we commissioned that particular project, Pan Asian Power, and we did two projects called, one is Pan Asian Power and the other one was Manel Vela. And then my problem was that because I was a promoter of that project, but I got the shares, amount of shares I got in that company, I was not very happy. So what I thought was that because the site belongs to someone, the investors from UK, and I was just a coordinator. So I thought that, okay, if I get the letter of intent of certain sites, if I find sites and go with an investor, then I thought that I can get a better share of the company. So what I did was that I incorporated a company, and by 2004, at that 2004, I'll explain that in my down the line in my lecture, in my presentation. So by 2004, I had another company called Hydropower Consultants, and then we got some sites into LOIs. It's called LOIs, the letter of intents from Electricity Board, and then got investors. So 2004, I wanted to use my IT knowledge also into business. So I started another company in March 2004 called Automated Barcode Solutions, which is a IT security company, which provides kind of IT security. Then 2019, by 2019, most of my projects were like commissioned, up and running, and some were, most of the projects still up and running, and I thought that I'll get some rest and started agriculture on my own because I have a very big land in Damul. I thought that I'll develop that land and do some agriculture. then DFCC, I joined DFCC and as a into the leasing department initially. And leasing department, I manage. There's nothing much to learn, but I learned the structured leasing, how to calculate the rentals, the equal rentals, and leasing techniques and mainly the customer relationship actually, and marketing, etc. So leasing, there's nothing much to learn, but then later I was transferred to the small and medium industry scale projects, SMI. There I managed to learn and learn also the project evaluation. How do we identify a good project? I think if I remember right, even this when I was there only we gave a loan to this LAF Vagapedia. That was in 1994, somewhere 1994, if I remember right. Vagapedia was not doing well at that time, and then he came to us, and then he started converting petrol vehicles to LP gas. So we gave initially 6 million, and then I think after that also we gave some of funds, and he started from there. Then you can see where he is today. So that is one of the projects that I handled jointly with another friend of mine called by the name Mohan Pereira. So therefore, when we do small type of projects, we have to really look into the cash flow, the market competition, the debt service cover ratio and debt equity, sensitivity analysis, and past records, crib, etc. But actually, the crib was not very accurate at that time and not easy to get also. So we were not looking at the crib, but our collection ratio is pretty good because our analysis had been good. Because if a client goes into problem, that is maybe due to some external factor, not in the sense maybe his health problem or whatever, not the project, not because of the failure of the project. So when we were doing that, we did certain accurate analysis, and we selected the right people. And if you can go through the past records of the DFCC, you will find that the project evaluation had been pretty accurate. Then 1996, actually, Mr. Prelis was the GM of general manager of DFCC. Actually, one of my heroes, because he is the one who took the biggest risk of financing mini hydropower, because no bank wanted to touch it. No bank wanted to touch it, and he took the risk and decided to finance mini hydro. Later on, only all the banks wanted to finance mini hydros, but the initial risk was taken by Mr. Prelis. He was a brilliant character. He's a brilliant character because his analysis was so good. I remember. I'll give you an example. One day I happened to go to see a tannery which was doing pretty well at that time. Then because they wanted some working capital loan, and I went there to see I did a site visit over there, and then the owner told me that in late 80s, because of the civil war, they had huge problems. Problems were like, the like this COVID situation, they couldn't go out, and because they have to get the raw material, and couldn't get raw material because of the curfew and the civil war and all these problems. So, but they had to keep on paying the bank loans and everything, the salaries, etc. And they ran out of funds, and they didn't have raw material to buy. They didn't have funds to buy raw material. So then they have gone to DFCC and asked for a loan. It was, as usual, the project officer had rejected it. Then he had made another request from the general manager directly. So Mr. Paley's himself had gone there. He himself had gone there, and he had gone through all the orders that he had and done a thorough study on whatever he had. And then he had recommended more than what he asked. Then he told me that with that funds, he paid off all these debts he had and got some raw materials and got the company running again. And he was doing pretty well at the time that I went there. That was in 93 or 94. So this is how a banker should look at a project. Because if someone has market, that is the most important thing. If someone has market, and if he is suffering from working capital problems, and if he has all the other infrastructure to do that business, so that is what is required. So this is what a banker should look into, not at the crib only. Right. Then this, I'll come back to this 1996, Mr. Paley's, he decided to finance this, take that risk and finance mini hydro. And then he wanted some engineers to get into that, and I had the privilege to join that team. And I was one of the members of that team, where I learned initial things required for to do a mini hydro project. Then the technical, those are like technical aspects in engineering point of view of this mini hydropower project, an agreement with the Ceylon Electricity Board. So those are the main things. The agreement in the sense the sign agreements for how long, and the terms and conditions, and those things have to be studied carefully. And also at that time there were not much of a problem from Central Environmental Authority and the other government institutions, but we also learned those things and the potential problems. Then the machinery supply. The machinery mainly from we buy mainly from China, and you have to go by the reputation of the company. Europeans are good but expensive. So Chinese were cheap, but still you get the good stuff sometimes. Not sometimes, most of the time. You have to be careful, but you get most of the time, you get good stuff. Then the civil engineering work. So mid-1998, as I told you earlier, I joined NDB Bank and took over the Kandy branch as the deputy manager. Since I didn't have the experience to run a branch, NDB decided to take a retired senior banker as the manager initially on contract for me to take over the branch later. But my intentions were not to be a banker or not to work for someone. I wanted to work for myself. So therefore, I worked there for 2.5 years. So there I managed to learn the general administration and review of the project reports done by the others, and then site visits and evaluation of large projects, like 30-40 million were big amounts at that time, and for a branch as well. So I handle only the large projects, and maintaining collection ratios like, collection ratios and repayments, I had to monitor strictly, because I had to do the I had to face the management meeting with the higher management, and then there I have met. I have. I'll briefly explain about the two projects that I came across when I was in NDB. A group of people, about 10 people, somewhere in 2000, if I remember right, somewhere in 2000, came to see me, and they were a breakaway group from Link Natural Products. They came and told me that they wanted the loan around 20 million, and they are going to contribute. Their contribution will be about 10 million. The total project was about 30 million, and they wanted to put up a building and then buy vehicles and then machinery, etc. And machinery to manufacture these similar products to what Link Natural Products are manufacturing. So I had my doubts for two reasons. One was that there were 10 shareholders. Two were the breakaway group, and other 8 were the investors. And I realized that investors didn't have any idea whatsoever about the project. They just have been persuaded to invest. And with my experience, I knew this is going to be a big problem later on. So I didn't like that idea, but I couldn't tell initially to the promoter, but later I phoned him and told that I don't like this idea. Then the other thing is that they were going to invest on buildings and other fixed assets. Then I said, look here, and majority loan was for the building. So I said, look here, why do you want to go for a huge loan like that for a building? Because in case if the business collapses, then you can't do anything with the building. So therefore, why don't you lease out? There are buildings, abandoned buildings at the Digana BOI premises for about 15,000-20,000 at that time, and you can easily go for that. And also machinery, try to do something, without buying those things, try to hire something like that, little ones, and also the vehicles. Go for a minimum amount of vehicles. Finally, he did another assessment, and finally their 20 million loan came to 2 million, just over 2 million. And then I liked the idea, and then we decided to finance him. And then he later came and he told me that what you said is very correct, because if he had gone for a big loan, then in a crisis situation, he'll be in trouble. Actually, it happened to him later, because end of 2000, I resigned from the bank and I went to England. And when I came back for a holiday in somewhere June of 2001, he contacted me. Somehow he came to know that I was there, and he contacted me and he invited me for dinner. So when I was there, he told me what happened, because the Link Natural Products had gone to courts under the Act of Intellectual Property Act, and under Intellectual Property Act, and anyway, he managed to win the case. And during the court case time, he couldn't do any manufacturing, but he had to keep on paying the loan. So what if he had a 20 million loan? The business would have collapsed at that time, but because it was only 2 million, just over 2 million, and he was in the grace period also, he managed to sell it. He managed to manage with the little funds that he had, and he continued with the project. Late, I think he winded up, but at that time, we didn't have any problem with that project. So it's another project that another area that you have to look into. You have to educate the clients as to how much they have to borrow. If they have no idea about that, because some people, they have only the technical knowledge. They have no idea whatsoever with the financial side of that. So you have to educate with your experience. Then the other project also very interesting. One day, the client came to me and said that he has a loan from DFCC Bank. I was at NDB at that time, DFCC Canary branch, and he has gone into arrears. And he said he can't pay the loan because he doesn't have any working capital. Then I didn't reject it just because he is in arrears. I said, I want to come and see your factory. He has a factory in brassware factory in this Pilimatalawa area, which is very much famous for that brassware manufacturing. And also he has an outlet in the Kennikalambu Road, Pilimatalawa itself. So one day I visited, and I found that he has pretty good infrastructure and also the sales outlet. He doesn't have to sell it elsewhere. He has outlet himself. So therefore, I went and I had a look, and I went through his accounts. Then I found that it's a real mess. Upstairs doesn't know what's happening in the downstairs. So therefore, I said, okay, look here, you have to separate these two. You have to separate your manufacturing section should sell it to the sales section, and then the sales section, let them keep a margin and sell it outside. So then you have to maintain two separate accounts for manufacturing and sales. And I said, you do it and come in 1 month time. So he came in 1 month time, and he said, sir, in Sinhala he said that he said, now I understand where I have gone wrong. So I said, and he asked for the loan. I said, no, you have to wait. And but I was happy with the way that he had been doing it. So I said, you come after another 1 month. Then in the meantime, DFCC manager contacted me, and he has informed DFCC that I'm going to take over the loan, because I had a credit line at that time, 8% interest, and I couldn't go for about 1 million, if I remember right, maximum. So DFCC manager contacted me and asked whether I'm going to give the loan. I said, yes, we are planning to give it, but we have to wait. He said, no, I can't wait because he's already in arrears for few months. I said, can't help. I can't, when I am trying to help you, you have to have your patience. Then he had, then the next month, end of next month also, he brought his accounts. And when I was going through, and I found that there's some 5% interest payment, 5% per month interest payment. Then I asked, what the hell is that? Then he said that because DFCC is pushing him. He borrowed money at 5% interest per month and pay the DFCC. I said, you are not going to get the loan if you behave like that, because even if you do go into arrears, your penal interest will be about 3% per annum, whereas you are paying 60%, and you are not going to manage your financing like that. Then he said, okay, sir, I'll take your instructions. Then the following month he came with the accounts. Then I was happy with the way that he had made a profit also, and he knows where he had gone wrong and how much they are making as profits. Then the end of third month, I gave him his arrears amount was 600,000 at that time, if I remember right, and I gave him 200,000 more than what he wanted to settle 600,000 DFCC and working capital 200,000. So then after about 6 months, when I visited him, I found that he was doing pretty well. So he had paid off all his unnecessary debts, because these people, although they are good at that side, they are very poor in handling finances, and they go for this 5%, 10% short-term loans, and they pay heavy interest and they run out of working capital. So this is always happening. So these two interesting areas that I just want to explain you as bankers. Then I go into the next one. So end of 2000, I left DFCC. End of 2000, I left NDB. And as I explained you, I joined that UN team who are doing project reports to finance East African region mini hydro projects. Because in East Africa, the hydro, all the water is available, but no infrastructure, no place to, even if you do manufacture energy, there's no electricity network line to give power. So what we did was that most of we used to we were financing the local people to generate power and give it village by village. So this is what I did, but those are small scale, like 200, 300 kilowatts, like. So then I was there for about a year, and then during my stay in London, that was in London. During my stay in London, I managed to contact my past friends, old friends, and then I managed to get, through one of my friends, managed to get 2 investors who agreed to come to Sri Lanka and invest in hydropower. Then, actually, as I told you, it was my dream to start something on my own. Then I came back to Sri Lanka in January 2002 with the investors, and when I was at NDB, I managed to we financed a project called I can't remember the name of the project, somewhere in Kabaragal area, and therefore the promoter was one Dr. Nishanta Nanayakkara, and Isri Leperuma, a renowned character. And Nishant and myself made a good rapport, and Nishant said that if I can bring investors, he will have sites. So then I brought investors to Sri Lanka, and then we went and had a look at one of his sites in Ratnapure, and they decided to invest on that project. So that is called the Pan Asian Power. My first power project Later, it was a very good project. Later, it went into, it was sold in share market also. It was bought by some Malaysian company and they sold the shares in the share market. And then, as I told you earlier, now I had my shareholding was pretty small at that time because I was only a promoter, and I got the matchmaking of two sides, that is Nishant and my investors. So I thought that okay, I will incorporate my own company and look for sites, and after getting sites, I'll look for investors. So it happened, and I incorporated a company called Hydropower Consultants Private Limited, and with a friend of mine who is an irrigation engineer, and we identified sites and got the LOI for that, and then managed to pursue Selinco Insurance General, and then started another company called Sea Hydro Developers Private Limited, where Pan Asian Power, the local directors, so myself and Nishant Nanayakkara, and Sea Hydro also, I am still in the board of the company. So Sea Hydro has two power projects under Sea Hydro name. One is 5 megawatt, that's a big one, and the total investment was, if I remember at that time, we commissioned in 2008. It was 720 million, but we didn't have any loans from anywhere. Selinco 100% in Selinco General invested 100%. It's all now loans paid in full and no debts at all. The second one is a 1.6 megawatt one, and we got a loan from 170. The total cost was 320 million, and we got a loan of 175 million from Sampak Bank. Actually, we didn't have to get it because we had enough funds at that time, but we decided to go for a loan because we decided to go for 175 million loan. But we had retaining funds there. Then again, at that time, by 2000, it was commissioned in 2008, and at that time I also had little money in hand. So I joined with a couple of friends who are engineers, and one later migrated to Australia, and we invested on another two projects, and I have a pretty high share holding in that company. So those are my hydropower background, and this is, you can see, one of the projects that we were going to just before starting, and when the ground being cleared, you can see this one. This excavator is excavating the soil there, and the same place that we have put up the powerhouse. So you can see how the powerhouse is coming, and the last picture shows you the inside of the powerhouse. So these are European machines, and very durable and rigid, very good machines. And on the left-hand side, you can see my name also is there. And at that time, Dr. Lalith Kotala, the chairman, but later he had to go out of the company. Now the chairman is Mr. Gunawardena, and some are not living also, but myself and the others are there. And on the picture on the right hand side shows again the same powerhouse inside. This is the powerhouse of the sea hydro. So when you look at, so this was commissioned in 2008, and the other one was commissioned in 2016, the second one. So this has the highest head in Sri Lanka, because the power generation, the capacity depends on the amount of water flows through the turbine and the head. Here, this project has the highest head in Sri Lanka, which is 494 meters. That is more than the Kandy-Colombo height difference. So that is the speciality of this power project, and I was heading the electromechanical side of that. So then this is my IT company, where there are two directors. I am one of them. Actually, I am not much involved in this, but my other partner is mainly handling the IT side of that. And these are some of our clients, but we have more than this. I just got some picture of this into the presentation. The other areas that I have studied is the geothermal energy and wave energy. If someone interested, I am not giving much details about this geothermal energy, but if someone interested in this, I can give the details of that. Geothermal is generally the energy inside the earth. Actually, the geothermal energy is 50,000 times of that of world energy. And if you can extract that energy, it's very clean, no environmental pollution, not at all. All what you do is that you send water inside, and the water, when it goes down, the temperature is something like 180 to 200. It becomes steam, and the steam comes out, and you can run a steam engine. With the steam engine, you generate clean energy. So after generating power, the water, again, it's a cycle. After generating power, it goes back to the same location and extract the heat and comes out and release it as energy. So it's very popular in Alaska and Iceland, and in America. If you can go through the internet and find the locations of that. And another, my favorite area is siphon technology. Siphon technology is for low head. You can't generate big amount of energy, like, we can generate about 200 to 300 kilowatts, but you can have series of turbines and you can connect series of turbines into that. Siphon technology is that, in Sri Lanka, you would have seen that like mini Payala, and there are so many canals where it runs about 20-30 kilometers. So with a small slope, but what they do is, normally when the slope is high, the water velocity increases. So therefore, to stop it, they have time to time drops, and they drop water and reduce the velocity. So when they drop, you can connect the turbines into those drops, and dissipated energy can be converted into energy. So the drop is meant for dissipating energy. Instead of dissipating energy, they can use that energy, utilize. So that is what this siphon technology does. So I'm not going into much technical details, as you all are not technical people, but I am just briefing out how it happens. But if anyone is interested, please contact me, then I'll give you more details about that. And right now, as I told you, I bought a land in 1999, 22 acres, and decided to do agriculture. Now I'm over 60, and this is my retirement age. So I'm not retiring, still working as still in the board of these power companies, but I made my retirement plan when I was only 42. So now I'm getting into that. So this is geothermal energy, just a brief about the area, potential, and all these things. And you can see the potential area. So it's starting from Trincomalee side, then going into Hambantota. So that is the potential area where we have identified 62 degrees in Kapuvella surface level. 62 degrees. Surface level 62 degrees is, if you go about, say, 500 meters, probably we can reach about 180 to 200 degrees. So the temperature required to do power generation is only 180 degrees Celsius. So the potential is there, but the thing is that we have to identify, we have to drill and identify the thermal gradient, the temperature gradient rather. And we can do some thermal mapping and identify, but you have to make sure 100% that the temperature gradient is there. Therefore, we have to drill it and see. But I couldn't find any investor for that, and just the project is just lying on papers only. So this is the siphon type energy. So you can see the turbine on the you can see in the third, this thing, it sucks the water to the turbine, and then it releases at the other end, while transferring the energy to the turbine blade, and blade rotates the generator. So it generates the siphon type turbine. So my other pet area is that, and also tips to, I wanted to give you some tips to become, if anyone is interested in becoming an entrepreneur. Actually, becoming an entrepreneur is not an easy task, in the sense you have to really work, but it's not impossible. It is possible, but you have to take a risk in the sense you can mitigate the risk by working hard towards your goal, because it is as if you are dumped in the middle of the sea. If you don't know how to swim, you will get drowned. So you have to really work hard. So best thing, you have to really identify the correct area of investment, area to invest. Now I knew that when I was working at NDB, I knew that the energy, hydropower will never collapse in the near future. So I knew that. So that's why I dropped the white collar job and took a huge risk and got into this. And I was 42 years at that time. Then select the right partners. If you don't have the right partners, it's a mess. It's going to be a hell of a mess. So when you are dealing with, if you want to get partners, if you don't have funds, and if you want to get someone to invest, then you have to get the right partners. But there's a saying called, too many cooks spoil the soup. So therefore you have to be careful very much with the amount of shareholders, investors coming in. So you try to limit as much as possible, because then when the company perform, you have less problems. Then be thorough with your area of investment. So you have to really study and understand what it is the market, and the market. When it goes to energy, actually there's no problem with the market, because there's a ready market with electricity boards. So therefore, we didn't have marketing problems. But other businesses, all the other businesses, have marketing problems. So therefore, you have to be very do a very thorough study about the market and the other factors, like the technical factors, the financial side, and all the other environmental factors. And also, main thing is try to bring capital as much as equity and go for a minimum loan. Reduce your gearing, because then even in the crisis period, now the businesses are in the crisis period. Now, business which can survive is the businesses who have less gearing. So like that. So therefore, try to reduce the gearing as much as you can. And you also have to be really on that. You can't just play around with that. You have to be at it, at least initially. You have to really concentrate what you are doing, and do not spend unnecessarily. That is lavish spending, like, going for fancy cars and fancy buildings and all these fancy things. You have to forget your fancy things and invest only on the required things. Thank you. And one more thing, I think I wanted to have that slide also in this, that is about the wave energy. Wave energy slide has not gone into this side. I think, sorry about that. Something has happened. That is, wave energy is the energy which can be generated with the sea waves. I'll briefly explain that also. Now, you take a container ship. One container is about 10 tons, and the ship brings about 10,000 containers. So you can see the weight of that. But it's like a pollella in the, when it's in the port, it goes up and down as if it's about 100, it weighs about 100 kilos, like the way that it goes up and down. So you can imagine the amount of energy the sea waves have. And my studies reveal that, Sri Lanka will have a very good potential, because the sea waves, the required sea waves, sea height has to be 1.5 meters, which is available in that Beruala and that area, 1.5 meters. So, unfortunately, there aren't any commercially running wave energy, commercially running electricity. Commercially, no one is commercially operating wave energy power stations. So that is a problem. So that is what I am stuck. But I think in Australia, Perth, also they are doing some studies. I tried to get some information, but I couldn't. So, but that is another very good area we can look at when it comes to energy. Then thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please ask. We are live there.
Yeah. Thank you, Abdul. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Does any of you have any questions? I think hope some of you take his advice to become an entrepreneur. like he had done. Yeah. I think initially hydropower projects we finance European machinery. Chinese machinery came later because like jointly with DFCC we financed Mark Marine.
Yeah,
That was European machinery. That was one of the first project. And I think I don't agree with one. You said that only Mr. Palis was leading. I think Palis, Mr. Ranjit Fernando, and we, HNB and Sampath, all. I went to World Bank when I went for another study in USA before the scheme came also. So the DACC had this administrative unit, and they were doing very fair job. Jayanta Nagendra was the head of that. And I think when you came with your investors, you met, I think, Mr. Palis first, maybe. He was your GM at DSC.
NTB, yeah.
Then he was NTB, and he only contacted us, me, because NTB didn't have any experience doing hydropower projects, and he wanted us to join in that loan.
No, this is for Pan Asia. What I said was 1996. He financed, the DFCC financed the first loan of Mr. Sumansekara.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the project, but that is in
I know.
Dikkoya.
Dikkoya, I have been to the project.
That was the very first hydro project.
Yeah.
So that's why I said he's the one who initiated it.
Yeah. You said other banks were not.
No, other banks came after that.
Yeah.
I didn't say other banks were not. Other banks, yes, but all the other banks came after that. DFCC started the financing. That's in 1996.
Yeah, maybe before the credit line also, I think. No?
Yeah. Before the credit line.
Yeah. Correct.
The credit lines were granted after that.
Yeah, I have been to that site and I have stayed. They had bungalows there.
Yeah.
Late Mr. Sumansekara was, Vidya Shilpa was there.
Vidya Shilpa, yeah.
All right. So, any questions?
I can't see the audience, so I don't know. I'm just blindly looking at them.
Now you can close your presentation, then you can see us.
Yeah, hang on.
You can stop presentation.
Yes.
Stop presentation.
I can see you only.
Yeah. Others, they are so beautiful and handsome. They don't want to show their. Okay, then I think we'll close your presentation. I think when you were at leasing at DFCC, Mr. Lakshman Silla also would have been at.
Yeah, Lucky myself, Prasad.
Janaka Perera is in Australia.
Sorry?
Janaka Perera was.
Janaka Perera was the boss.
Yeah,
and Lucky, myself, and Lucky was senior, but we were in the same team. Yeah, Lucky, myself, Prakash Jayamana, Champal Costa. We were together.
All of them now retired. Champal also retired.
All retired. All are over 60 now, except Lucky.
Right.
Okay
then. Thank you. Thank you very much. All the you didn't explain us your agriculture project. I thought you will explain.
Well, agriculture project. I'll briefly come on that. That is this TJC. TJC, the new variety of, but most of the people know it as Alfonso. But actually, it's not the right name. It's called the TJC, and it's I think invented, that particular breed invented by Illawarra Farm. They are doing pretty well, and one of the biggest farms in that area.
What's the name?
And Illawarra Farm.
Illawarra Farm. Okay.
Yeah. TJC's Tom Illawarra is the Tom Illawarra and another JC is a European guy. Australian guy, I think. They were the two who started that, and now they have that. There's a big demand for TJC, and also now method of growing is different. Now there are those days we could grow only 40 trees per acre. Now we can grow under high density. We can grow about 200 plants, and under ultra high density 600 plants. So it's only 6 feet apart. So I am growing now, not ultra high, but high density, because I have enough land over there. And also turmeric also, but turmeric I'm processing. I think it's the best thing is to do a value addition. So my second plan is to do a value addition, not only just sell the raw material. It's raw, but I want to do a value addition on that. So that is about agriculture.
Right. Okay.
I for the last 2 years I invested more than 10 million now because I'm using the technology. One is that now I bought excavators, tractors, and solar water pumps, which pumps about 100,000 liters per day, and other electrical pumps as well. And also I want to go for drone type, to spray fertilizer, etc.
Okay.
Droners. So
A droner, yeah.
Yeah. When you use technology, you need, because you have to, otherwise you have to pay 1,500 rupees per day per laborer. So you can't make a profit if you do that.
Actually,
So you have to automate it.
incidentally, I am also discussing with one of my batchmates who is in USA. He wants to bring drone technology to Sri Lanka for logistics. He's preparing the plan, proposal.
Yeah.
And, we might start it in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, that's right. You can give the coordinates. You can give the coordinates of different points, and let the drone. You release the drone, and it will do its job and come back.
Yeah.
I think you have to limit the time. You can control everything with your laptop, and you have to limit it to 20 minutes. So like that, I am also trying to do that, but not immediately, but later on.
Okay. And if you want, you can be our first customer if you want to.
Yes, sure. One of them will help me surely.
Okay then, thank you.
Okay, Pia. All right.
Taking your time with your busy schedule. මේ දවස්වල මොකෙන්ද කෑව කිව්වේ මේ
දෙමරෙක්
දෙමරෙක් කාලා Facebook එකේ දාලා තියෙනවා පින්තූර මෙන්න නෙමෙයි තියෙන්නේ Facebook එකේ තියෙන මුල ටිකක් වෙනස්
මේ ඇහැ
ඒක ඇහැ කොහෙලා තියෙනවා
කෑවේ මෙතන මේ ඇහැ
ඔක්කොම තියෙද්දි he prepared for the presentation and following up with me, and thank you very much, Akbar.
Okay.
And when you harvest mangoes, please send something for me as well.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thanks.
Good night.
Good night. You can. I am not saying good night to the students. Right. Oops. What happened? Right. Shall we take a break after? We'll meet at 8:15. Okay.
Okay.
I will come back a little early, but we'll take a break. 10 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Can you see this document, Fern? Certificate in Project Finance?
Yes, sir. Can see it.
Okay. So assignment 3 is I am giving you 3 exercises, which we are going to finish today and on Tuesday on project evaluation, project analysis and evaluation. Okay. So, and so you will learn and you can do it, and you can submit to me by Sunday, 23rd of May. And this time no extensions, because we are coming to end of the course. After today, we have only 2 more weeks, that is 4 more lectures to complete the course, 48 hours. Okay. So now I will share with you the so this is the assignment 3. Fanny, can you see?
No, sir, no card.
Ah, you can't see, right? Okay. Now I think you can see, no?
Now, okay, sir.
Yeah. So this is the number 1 exercise, and okay. Then number 2, number 3, and what we have learned and what we are learning, you can do it. When you do it on your own, you will learn more, and how to do an analysis of NPV, scenario analysis, the sensitivity analysis, and break even. Okay, break even, and the I think break even, and you have operating leverage, right? All these things. Have you seen this? Did you see this today?
Yes.
Okay, good. So start working on it. It won't take long, but I have given you enough time. Start now, and if you have any problems, tell me early. If you are short of information, then we can I can check and give it. Right. So we go to the okay. Can you see this? Project analysis and evaluation, right? We started this last month beginning, but because we had different presentations, everything, we could not continue. And I was planning to do it back at the IBSL, because I have the whiteboard or that instrument, then I can write it. But since it is not available, I don't think you may not start operations even next week. So I thought I'll finish it off, and I have shared today the presentation. Earlier I had shared with you presentation without the answers for the problems, but now I have shared with you the presentation with answers to the problem, right? So with that, we'll get on to this, right? So I will go through the initial slides which we have already gone through a month back. So financial analysis It's very important. We have to calculate NPV or IRR of the project to find out whether the project is viable. Okay. So we are going to have a visual technique for construction of financial models using influence diagrams, right? So we will have the influence diagrams. Then we are going to do scenario analysis and sensitivity analysis. Now your assignment also, you have some questions, scenario analysis, one I saw there, sensitivity analysis also. Right. These we went through. So we calculated positive NPV. When we arrive at positive NPV, are we going to stop here and move on to next proposal? No, we are not. We discussed that our NPV can be positive is a good sign, but there are two circumstances under which DCF analysis could lead to positive NPV. That the project is actually having positive NPV, right? Or project is having negative NPV but showing positive NPV. Okay, because our estimates are inaccurate. The other possibility is we can have a negative NPV project actually when true NPV is positive. So then we will lose a valuable opportunity. So we studied what are the variables we have to look at more closely to find out whether the NPV, it is affecting NPV correctly. Okay. So we looked at forecasting risk, right? Forecasting risk is that we can make a mistake because of our forecasting of our estimates are wrong, right? So we said when garbage in, garbage out system, because these are all complicated calculations, then if we put garbage in, we can get garbage out. We can make any project NPV positive by changing the inputs. So the forecasting or estimation risk is the possibility that we make a bad decision because of errors in the projected cash flow. That is called forecasting risk. So because of the forecasting risk, there is a danger that we think project has a positive NPV when it really does not. So we studied some tools that identify areas where the potential errors exist and where they might be specially damaging. So, and we will try to assess the economic reasonableness of our estimates. And we will assess how much damage will be done by errors in these estimates. So we did something. So we'll just go through sources of value. So to get NPV positive, what is it that leads to positive NPV? Right? We should be able to point to something specific as the sources of value. If the proposal under consideration involves a new product, we may raise the following questions. Are we certain that our new product is significantly better than that of the competition? Right? Now, I think Mr. Bulumulla was explaining about some new technology, like wave technology and that other heat technology from the earth. But we have to find out whether those technology costing, right? You can have technology, but if the cost is high, then there is no point because our power generation or energy generation will be high. Right? So can we manufacture at a lower cost? And can we distribute more effectively? Right? Because if we manufacture product, if we can't distribute more effectively, then we won't get the market. And can we identify undeveloped market niches? So if we can identify some market niches that has not been developed, then we have a market there. And how can we gain control of the market? And Mr. Ulumul also said market is very important. Now, hydropower power sector market is not a problem in Sri Lanka because CEB is going to buy. But other products, the market is very important. So these are few sources of value, and there are many others. So key factor to keep in mind is the degree of competition in the market. Now, there's so much competition in the market. In such a market, if we have positive NPV investments, then it is highly unlikely, right? In a highly competitive environment, to have positive NPV investment will be rare. So we have to think someone coming in with a project in a very competitive market and say that I have very positive NPV, right? So then you have to look into the details, how he is going to achieve that, whether he has a cost advantage, whether he has distribution advantage, whether he has market niche, right? So all these things have to be identified. Therefore, proposals that appear to show significant value in the face of stiff competition are particularly troublesome. So when you analyze a project, you have to look at it. Even before going into the proposal, ask the promoter, the customer, what is your project and how are you going to compete in this market? What is your value proposition, right? So we did a scenario what if analysis, right? When evaluating cash flow and NPV estimates, our goal is to assess the degree of forecasting risk and to identify those components that are more critical to the success or failure of an investment. So this problem one, I think we have done already, but we'll just go through. We are investigating a new project. First thing we will do is to estimate NPV based on our projected cash flow. So we will call this a base case, and there is a possibility of error. That is, we can have a upper bound and lower bound. Right? So upper bound of our estimates, our variables, and the lower bound of variables. So the project is cost is 200,000, 5-year life, depreciation straight line to 0, and required return is 12%, and the tax rate is 34%. So the base case is 6,000 unit sale, price 80 rupees, and variable cost is 60, and the fixed cost is 50,000. So the lower bound and upper bound given. Calculate base case NPV. We have done at IBSL when I was explaining, then you didn't have this solution. I did it on the board and you would have written down. Now you have the solution, right? How I have done. So I'm not going to explain. If you have any problems, you can ask me now or maybe next Tuesday or in between, because we have a lot of holidays. I can spare some time if you call me. So the solution one. Then scenario analysis, right? Scenario analysis is we change some factors, but not only one factor, but 3 factors, and see what is the effect on the NPV, right? So it is the basic what if analysis. When we start looking at alternative scenarios and find that the most of the plausible ones result in positive NPVs. So we look at scenarios and see most of the ones are having positive NPVs, then we can have confidence in proceeding with the project. But many of our scenarios are negative, then we are having high degree of forecasting risk, and further investigation is in order. The base case is NPV positive, but when we have lot of scenarios NPV negative, then we'll have to further investigate. And so good place to start. We have to look at the worst case scenario. We have the base case. If the worst case scenario NPV is positive, then we can go ahead with the project, because even the worst case NPV is positive. This will give the minimum NPV of the project. if it is positive, we are in good shape. We also look at other extreme, the best case, which will put an upper bound on our NPV. So we look at the best case because then we know that is the maximum our NPV can go. Worst case is more important because it is negative, then we have to further investigate. If it is positive, then we can take a risk and go ahead with the project. Take very low risk and go ahead with the project. So problem two, I think we are. I think problem 2 also we have done it. Wait, let me see. Yeah, so we'll just, I think we did the problem 2 also and the solution to. Problem 2 is state the worst case and best case scenarios from the earlier example and calculate net income. Now, the worst case and best case, what did we say? You have to take, for the worst case, lowest unit sales, lowest price per unit, highest variable cost and highest fixed cost. And the best case is highest unit sales, highest price per unit, and the lowest variable cost and lowest fixed cost. So that is, we have done it, you go through it. And then we calculated, right, sales, we calculated the variable cost, fixed cost, depreciation, and then we got the EBIT, then use the tax, net income, base operating cash flow. What is operating cash flow? Net income plus depreciation minus tax. Okay. Right. So we have worst case scenario minus 111,719 is the NPV and best case 159,000. So all those are, we have put it in a table here, base, worst and best case, net income, cash flow, NPV and IRR. IRR we have not calculated here, but calculation is given here. Now we discuss, we can do unlimited number of different scenarios, right? But what will happen? But better we do only about 4 or 5 scenarios, like the base case and worst case, and 2 intermediate cases between the base and best, between the base and worst, in between 50%, and we can do. If not, we have too many scenarios, we can run the risk of paralysis of analysis, right? So scenario analysis will tell what can happen and helping us to gauge the potential for disaster, but it does not tell us whether or not to take the project. So that decision is with ours. It only gives us a guideline. Sensitivity analysis, where we change only one variable and then look at how it will affect the NPV, right? So the problem 3, find out sensitivity of NPV of earlier project to unit sales and fixed cost. We had the earlier project, right? We did this also in the class at IBSL office, IBSL classroom. So sensitivity of NPV, we do for unit sales. And I have not done the calculations because we have done the calculations before. The base case won't change. So unit sales, worst case is lower unit sale. Other variables are not changing in the base case. And the best case is higher unit sales. And we have calculated, we have worst case minus 8,226, this 8,226, right? And sensitivity of the fixed cost is base case, same thing, right? And the sensitivity is worst case is higher fixed cost and the best case is lower fixed cost. Here we get NPV worst case 3,671. So if you look at unit sales and fixed cost, we find NPV is more sensitive to unit sales because it goes negative. But for fixed cost, it's not so sensitive. So under worst case for fixed cost, NPV is positive. So if we find estimated NPV is especially sensitive to a variable, now in this case is unit sales, then we might have to look at the market research again and to get an idea whether our base case projections are achievable. Then sensitivity analysis can also suffer from same drawbacks as scenario analysis. It's also pointing out where forecasting errors will do more damage, but does not tell us what to do with possible errors. Simulation analysis. We didn't do any simulation analysis. Simulation is combination of scenario and sensitivity analysis. Now I think people who are going to become pilots, they simulate in a lab the environment of a flight. So for them to learn. Right? So simulation here also, like we simulate the variables so that we can find out what is happening due to different variables are changing. Did we do break-even analysis? I think we did break-even also. Right. The crucial variable for project we found in earlier example also, the sales volume. Right. So if you are thinking of a new product or entering a new market, the hardest thing to forecast is how much we can sell. This is because we don't know. We haven't entered the market, our product is not known. And how are we going to project how much we are going to sell? So that is the hardest thing we can. So therefore, sales volume is analyzed more closely than the other variables. So break-even analysis is commonly used tool for analyzing the relationship between sales volume and profitability. Right? So there are different break-even measures like we did accounting break-even, cash break-even, financial break-even. So I think we had a look at all those break-evens. Right. So first, variable cost is Q, the total quantity of output into variable cost per unit, simple V. Right. So this example is very simple example. We have $2 per variable unit cost, and output is 1,000. What is the total variable cost? So we multiply 1,000 quantity of output by $2. 2,000 is the total variable cost. Right. I think problem 5 also we went through the Bloom Corporation, where they have received order for 5,000 masks, and the company has decided to whether or not to accept the order. Right? From recent experience, the company knows that each mask requires 5 USD cents in raw materials and 50 USD cents in direct labor costs. Assuming these variable costs to continue in the future, calculate Bloom's total variable cost. It's very, very easy. 0.55 is the US dollars, the variable cost, into 5,000 masks. This total variable cost is $2,750. So the fixed costs that do not change when the quantity of output changes during a particular time period. Now, fixed cost is not fixed forever. It is fixed for some time period, and we can reduce fixed cost. Most of the establishments try to reduce their fixed cost so that even when you don't have business, your expenditure is controlled. Any fixed cost can be modified or eliminated given enough time. So in the long run, all costs are variable. Right? So the total cost is variable cost plus fixed cost. So variable cost is simple V into Q and plus fixed cost. Then marginal or incremental cost. The change in cost that occurs when there is small change in output is marginal. That is, if we increase by 1 unit production, what is the marginal? That is the cost increases, that marginal or incremental cost. And if you increase your sales by 1, the change in cost is marginal incremental, change in income is marginal incremental revenue. So now same Bloom Corporation, we know the variable cost is 55 US cents. The lease payments on the production facility is $5,000 per month. Now when you read a problem, you have to be careful. Per month means normally we do for annually, right? If Bloom produces 100,000 masks per year, what are the total cost of production? And what is the average cost per mask? Right? So what we did that 55 cents into 100,000 plus factory cost 5,000 into 12 months. And we got total cost 115,000. The average cost is 115,000 divided by 100,000 units is $115. Then the second part, we had a look. Bloom receives a special one-shot order for 5,000 masks, and it has sufficient capacity to manufacture 5,000 masks on top of the 100,000 already produced. So if Bloom can get 75 US cents per mask for this order, should the order be accepted? When we look at it, we think why our average cost is 115. Why are we going to take 75 cents order? But when you analyze it, right, because the variable cost, the marginal cost is 55 cents, right? Marginal cost is 55 cents. So if you get marginal revenue of 75 cents, then you're up on the deal. So Bloom should take the order, because when you are having marginal revenue more than the marginal cost, then you are covering your cost of the fixed cost also covered by the revenue. Then we looked at the accounting break-even. Accounting break-even. Accounting break-even, we said, is when the net income is zero. Accounting is, we go for a net income, right, in the accounting sense. So accounting break-even, when the net income is zero, what is the quantity of the sales, right? So we use this equation and we said for accounting break-even, Q is equal to fixed cost plus depreciation. That is like the fixed cost, total fixed cost plus fixed cost coming from operations, depreciation coming from the investment. So fixed cost plus depreciation divided by margin, the price minus variable cost. So in this example, our company plans retail computer pen drives 500 per piece. We can buy pen drives from a wholesale supplier for 300 per piece. So P is 500, simple V is 300, right? We have accounting expenses 600,000 in fixed cost and 300,000 depreciation. So fixed cost is 600,000, D is 300,000 divided by 500 minus 300. So we get the accounting break even is 4,500 for this pen drives. So why accounting break even is useful? It's like the payback period, right? And it is easy to calculate and explain, right? Accounting break-even, it is easy to say when net income is 0, the number of items sold is accounting break-even. So managers are often concerned with the contribution of project will make to the firm's total accounting earnings, right? So accounting earnings, if you are not losing on the accounting earnings, then the managers are okay, right? But the project that does not break even in accounting sense actually reduces total earnings, right? A project that does not break even in accounting sense, that is, if it's not breaking even in accounting sense, then our total earnings will come down. And a project that breaks even on accounting basis but loses money because we need a return on our investment, right? And there is a financial opportunity cost. So it doesn't lose money in an out of pocket sense. So we are not losing money, but we are not making money also when accounting break even. So accounting break even and cash flow, if sales volume is a critical variable, then we need to know more about the relationship between sales volume and cash flow than just the accounting break even, right? Accounting break even doesn't take into account the cash flow, right? So the problem 8 we did, the Sri Lanka Shipping Company is considering whether to launch its new fishing boat. Okay. The selling price will be USD 4,000. Yeah, will be USD 40,000 per boat. The variable cost will be USD 20,000 per boat, and fixed cost will be USD 500,000 per year. The total investment needed to undertake the project is USD 3.5 million. This amount will be depreciated straight line to 0. So, did we do this example? No, because I also can't remember.
No, sir, we didn't do that.
We didn't do.
We didn't.
We did it. No, yeah. That's
No, no, we did not.
we did not. Right. Okay. So then we will go through it. Right. Ignoring taxes, should this project be launched, calculate the accounting break-even volume and IRR and NPV at the sales volume. So calculate payback period and relate it to break-even. So several things we have to do it, right? So first we have to calculate the NPV because it's asking, ignoring taxes, should this project be launched? Okay, so operating cash flow, EBIT plus depreciation minus taxes, right? So then when EBIT is sales minus variable cost minus fixed cost minus depreciation plus depreciation minus 0. Okay, so it is can simply sales and variable cost is Q P minus V minus fixed cost. Since there are no taxes, D and D goes off, right? So Q P minus V, Q into P minus V minus fixed cost. So we are calculating for this. We have 40,000, 20,000, and fixed cost will be 500,000, and the investment is 3.5 million. We don't need the depreciation now, right? So we'll look at 85 boards is the quantity we are projected, right? 5 years, 425 boards or 85 units. So 85 into 40,000 minus 20,000 minus 500,000. Okay. So it is 1.2 million per year, the operating cash flow. So we have to in your assignment also you have to use annuity factor. You can find in a finance table, or you can calculate it like this. Annuity factor is 1 minus 1 divided by 1.2. 1.2 is, I think, 20%, right? 20% required return. So 1.2 to the power 5, that's 5 years, divided by again the rate, discount rate, 0.2. So you get 2.9906, that's the annuity factor for 5 years. So net present value is, we have the initial investment of 3.5 million, annual cash flow is 1.2 million. Since it is same, only we can use the annuity factor. Same cash flow for 5 years. And multiply by annuity factor, we get the NPV 88,720. So if we don't have any other information, the project should be launched, right? Because the NPV is positive. Now we look at, we were to calculate accounting break-even, IRR, we have already done the NPV and the sales volume. Okay. So accounting break-even, we again use P minus V. This is net income is equal to 0. So the accounting break-even quantity is fixed cost plus depreciation divided by P minus V, the margin. So fixed cost 500,000, depreciation 700,000, because depreciation, how we arrived, 3.5 million for 5 years, right? So it's 700,000. Okay. $700,000 divided by 20,000, you get, if we sell 60 boards, we are breaking even on accounting basis. That is, our net income will be 0. Okay. So if 60 boards are sold, net income will be 0. Then operating cash flow is equal to depreciation, right? Because net income is 0, operating cash flow will be equal to depreciation, right? So net present value is, for operating cash flow, use the depreciation and calculate net present value minus 1,406,580. That's why I earlier said, when you account in break even, you are losing because you are not getting your return expected. That's why NPV is minus, IRR is 0. Okay. So payback period is 5 years, because the operating cash flow is 700,000, investment is 3.5 million, we are recovering it in 5 years. That is, the project's payback period is equal to its life if the project break even every period. Similarly, project that does better than the break even has a payback period less than 5 years, right? Shorter than the life of project, and has positive IRR. Right? So if it is project that does better than the break even has a payback period that is shorter than the 5 years and positive IRR. Okay. So then the sales volume and operating cash flow, right? Now we look at the operating cash flow is equal to P minus V into Q minus fixed cost minus depreciation, that is income, there is no tax here, plus depreciation. So P minus V into Q minus fixed cost, right? So 40 minus 20 into Q minus 500. So we have the relationship between operating cash flow and sales volume is given by a single straight line with a slope of 20,000. Right here, we have taken these thousands out. slope of 20,000 and a y-axis intercept of 500,000. So we are for different sales volumes, we calculate the cash flow and draw the graph. Right, when 0 it's minus 500, 550 minus 200. Now should be straight line, but when I did it, it has come little. It's not strictly straight, but it should be a straight line. Right? So operating cash flow is here quantity sold. This is the operating cash flow, right? And this is the with the quantity sold. What is the operating cash flow? So shall we do this on Tuesday? Cash flow, accounting and financial break-even points. Okay. Cash flow and accounting. We can finish it on Tuesday. Yeah, we have done 45 slides. Right. We have how many more? Only 10 more slides. We can finish it. Any questions? Yes, Tarindri, you have a question, I think.
No, not right now, sir.
Not now, right? I thought you were going to ask something, right?
No.
Nuvani, you have questions?
After this session, I mean, like we have only flow classes remaining now.
Yes.
So will we how we will be able to cover the content of the course?
Yeah. I went through the syllabus, right? We have covered most of the things, and I will be covering one risk. That's called risk and return, right? That is one thing. And there is one thing called the documentation. And I was thinking of getting we worked with a Maldivian lawyer on Maldives project, and I wanted him to do something, but I don't think it will work. I will try to do something on the documentation. And then I was jotting down today some areas. Country risk. Now you do a project. I don't know whether Dhulnika covered it. I have to check the presentation. And the country risk, what we mean by country risk, and this documentation I will cover. Okay? So we will be able to finish the. If you have any subjects, any areas, you tell me. To my best of ability, I will cover it. Okay. If you have want anything, no one tell me. Right. Thanks for that question. I think very important thing that you need to know whether we are covering everything promised.
After that, sir, will there be a written exam?
Yeah. According to the what is this? There's a written exam.
Any idea about the date?
That's what I have to ask Menaka as well, because how are we going to do it written exam without going to the IBS? Right? So Menaka, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Menaka, how are we going to do the written exam?
Yes, sir. Now, after this with this situation, we can announce the exam dates, sir.
Right. Normally it is held at IBS, is it?
Yes, sir. This is a physical exam, sir. All should have come to IBSL, sir.
Yeah.
So will it be a 2-hour paper or a 1-hour paper? Any idea about that? No, you haven't decided.
Normally certificate course 3-hour paper.
3-hour paper, right? Okay. So I will have to prepare the questions. How many questions, Menaka, normally?
Out of 8, sir, they can select 5 questions.
Like the banking exam, right?
Yes, sir, yes.
Okay. So I will have to prepare 8 questions for you, and you have to answer 5. So what I have given for assignment 3, I was earlier thinking, according to, we were to do a case study. We are not doing case study. That the assignment 3 is that. So you do the assignment 3, you learn how to do the calculations.
Right.
Similar question will come in the exam as well.
And how many marks are you allocating for the second assignment, that hotel project assignment?
Yeah. Second assignment, I have given 2 marks for that introductions. Then first assignment, I am giving 10 marks. Second assignment, 8 marks.
Okay.
And the last one, I think, depending on how many of you submit, if you all of you submit and you have done well, I will increase the number of marks to 10, right? So then everyone gets some marks before the exams, right?
I guess your main objective is to pass everyone, no?
Yeah. That's what my objective, that everyone should learn and everyone should pass.
Yes, I think.
And objective of some of you is to fail the exam.
No.
Not
Why
you,
should we have?
some others. Actually, I had to ask them to come and do the presentations also. Some of them, because I want them to learn, and then main thing is not passing the exam, learning, right? How to apply it in a project finance. Exam is the secondary thing, that you get a certificate, but main thing is, you, after this course is over, you should be able to do project finance evaluations and everything with more confidence. All of you, some of you are already doing it, and with confidence, you will be able to do it. That's what my objective.
Okay, sir.
The exam is the objective of IBSL, because this is a certificate course. They need to have exam. I also help without the exam, because I have to prepare exam paper. Wait, okay.
And I think even the bosses, they want us to go through an exam and pass it, no? Since they have paid for us, yes.
Yeah, because the certificate course, you have to get a certificate. So you need to pass the exam.
Pass the exam. Right.
And with distinction, I think some of you can get the A pass, I think. Over 80 marks is 81 and above is distinction, right? 65 to 80 is merit. And 51 to 64 pass, less than 50 is fail. So if you haven't scored any marks in the assignments, then you are in trouble, no? Because if you have scored marks in the assignment, then you have very little to do in the exam also.
Yes.
Okay, very good questions. Fernie, you have a question? Lakmali, DFCC, former DFCC person today, did you listen to him?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You had a great leader those days, like Mr. Pelis. He was, I think, GM for a long time, and he only got the, I think, after converting from development banks to commercial banks, there is some setback for both. There were some setbacks for both NDB and DFCC. If not, they were doing well, better than, and those days they were getting a lot of funds, right? Low cost funds for lending. And we should have a development bank again to do this project finance. Right. Anyone else has any questions? I think most. How are your banks doing with the COVID situation? Most of you are working from home, hopefully.
Yes, sir, we are working from home. Visiting clients, of course, it's almost like on hold. So our branches are requested to visit and come back to us. Other than that, we have I'm like, hey, top management doesn't come to office at all. They're just at home. So all at home and working.
Right, right.
Only the need like trade operations, that type of people who should be there is in the premises
Right.
in our bank, of course.
Okay, okay, Noni. Actually, I asked Cargill CEO today because of the death of their AG Mighty. He said he's going every day to office. So he said if he doesn't go to office, the work will get delayed.
Accumulated.
Yeah, accumulated. So he's going, it seems, to office every day. Right. And I think most exposed is Bank of Ceylon and People's Bank, and they have such a customer base. The branches have to be open, and 40 each branches of both banks are closed these days due to COVID. Right. Okay then. Thank you very much. See you on Tuesday. Hope
Thank
you
you,
have a very good holiday, 3-day holiday. And I think Imam should have given us some, but we are going to see. Okay, thank you.